A couple of local cops decided to give me quite the welcome to their town. They tied me to a lamppost right in the middle of the street, putting on a show like I was some nobody. What they didn't realize was who they were actually messing with, or how badly this would backfire. But let's rewind to the beginning. Here's the deal. My name's Danny, 54 years old, been around the block a few times. I just moved to this small, out-of-the-way town in South Carolina to take on the role of chief of police. This wasn't my first time wearing the badge. I've seen plenty in my years. But something about this place felt different. Everyone knew everyone, and fresh faces weren't exactly celebrated. It didn't take long for me to notice the cops here had their own way of doing things, one that didn't quite align with the rule book, if you catch my drift. On my first day, before officially stepping in, I decided to take a walk around, scope out the area, and get a sense of the place. I threw on an old jacket and a worn-out cap, blending in like any other passerby. I wandered into a local cafe, the kind of spot that looked like it had been there forever. The second I stepped through the door, I felt the weight of every stare in the room, the classic "you don't belong here" vibe. In the corner, two cops were laughing about something, sneaking glances my way. It didn't take a detective to figure out I was the punchline. I ordered coffee, staying cool and quiet, just to see how things would play out. My plan wasn't to reveal who I was, not yet. This was a recon mission. As I grabbed my coffee to go, one of them called out, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Hey, old man, you lost or something? You don't look like a local." I half turned, keeping a neutral face. "Just passing through," I replied, but they weren't buying it. The taller one, with a smug grin, shot back, "Well, maybe keep passing. Strangers don't last long around here, if you get my drift." I shrugged it off and left, but I could feel their eyes following me as I walked away. It was obvious my new job wasn't going to be just paperwork and meetings. The next morning, I went for a run on the outskirts of town. It was supposed to be a peaceful way to clear my head. But halfway through, I heard the sound of a patrol car pulling up beside me. Sure enough, it was the same two from the cafe, Jake and Mike. Jake, the tall, wiry one with that signature smirk, leaned out the window and shouted, "Hey, runner. You lost." The way he said it, you'd think I'd just trespassed on private property. His partner Mike, a bulky guy who looked like he could bench press a truck, chimed in, "Yeah, you sure you're welcome around here?" I kept my cool, slowing my pace as I replied, "Just going for a run." "Pretty sure that's still allowed, right?" Mike grinned, a smug, knowing look on his face. "Allowed, sure. But strangers don't exactly get the warmest welcome here, especially if they don't know our rules." Before I could respond, they jumped out of the car. Jake got uncomfortably close and started patting me down without so much as a "may I?" I took a breath, staying calm as they rummaged through my pockets, tossing smug looks at each other, like this was some kind of game. Jake eventually pulled out a random scrap of plastic from my pocket, holding it up like it was evidence in a high-profile case. Well, look what we have here," he sneered. It was clear this was a setup. By then, I'd had enough of their friendly welcome, but I stayed calm. They had no idea who I really was, and I wasn't about to blow my cover just yet. Without a word, they grabbed me by the arms and dragged me to the town square. No explanations, no questions, just hauling me along like I was a stray dog. They tied me to a lamppost, making sure everyone could see. People stopped, some recording with their phones, others chuckling like it was some kind of entertainment. Jake, ever the showman, declared loudly, "Ladies and gentlemen, we've got ourselves a big city troublemaker here." The scene was ridiculous and disturbing. These two were so wrapped up in their performance, they didn't care how obvious their setup looked. Little did they know their act was about to go viral. With Jake and Mike out of the picture, the real work began. Cleaning up the department wasn't going to happen overnight. The town's trust in law enforcement was shattered, and I knew that if I didn't handle this carefully, it could take years, if ever, to rebuild it. I called for an open town meeting at the community center, inviting every resident to voice their concerns. The hall was packed to the brim. It seemed like everyone had something to say. Some were angry, shouting about years of corruption and neglect. Others were hesitant, cautiously hopeful that change was finally possible. I stood at the front, listening to every story, every complaint, and every suggestion. It was clear that this wasn't just about two bad cops. This was about a culture of silence and intimidation that had been allowed to thrive for far too long. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. "I'm not here to promise miracles," I said, scanning the crowd. "But I will promise this. Every officer in this department will be held to the highest standard. We're here to serve you, not the other way around." The response was a mix of applause and skeptical murmurs. Trust had to be earned, not demanded. A new approach. The next step was a complete overhaul of department policies. Mandatory body cameras, strict accountability measures, and regular community outreach programs became the new norm. I brought in outside consultants to conduct sensitivity training, and I personally vetted every officer still on the force. Those who didn't align with the new vision were shown the door. I also set up an anonymous tip line, giving residents a safe way to report misconduct. It didn't take long for the complaints to pour in, old wounds being reopened, new concerns being raised. We took every report seriously, launching investigations and taking swift action when necessary. It was messy, but it was progress. The ripple effect. Word of the department's transformation spread beyond the town. Other small communities facing similar issues began reaching out, asking for advice on how to tackle their own problems. Journalists followed the story closely, shifting the narrative from scandal to reform. One day, a young woman stopped me on the street. She couldn't have been more than 20, but the look in her eyes spoke of someone who'd seen far too much. She thanked me for taking action, saying she'd always been afraid to speak out before. "That's why we're doing this," I told her. "So no one has to feel that way again."